Yeah. I see Giebert, Shaw, Urban, and Bachhuber.
Okay. First item of business is approval of the minutes from March 15th.
I will so move.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion for approval and a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So minutes are approved.
Lisa,
First item
second.
of business then, or next item of business is the Retail Ridge Stormwater Management. Eric, do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, so they were before you last month, and you asked to defer until staff had more time to review it. I did review it pretty well and made comments to Wiser Engineering, and they resolved those comments and submitted an amendment, which is what was attached to the meeting packet. And we have Wade Wise and Kate Mahar here from Wiser to make a presentation and talk about the performance of this. Wade, do you want to take it away? Do you want to share, or do you want me to flip?
If you want to have Kate share, she has the presentation available, Eric.
Yep.
Okay.
Eric, just want to make sure you got Lisa as being present.
I do. Hi, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right, Kate, I think you should be able to share now.
Okay, thanks everyone for your time last month and for your time tonight. I'll be brief in the overview because I think we kind of explained the project last time, and Kate will dive into the details. But Red Tail Ridge is approximately 128 acre development between High Road and Pleasant View on the city's north side. So you can see the project oversight for those that weren't here last time or familiar with the project area. But we are talking about the master stormwater management plan for this 128 acre development. And we are starting to turn our focus now into the final plat, which is more or less the westerly 40 acres associated with the project. The master plan that you see in front of you here, this is the one that was approved at a GDP level through Plan Commission. Planning efforts were done by Smith Group, but it is mostly a residential, mixed-use residential project with different product type. The site goals and objectives were to provide 100% infiltration among the city standard ordinances and to spread out the infiltration practices. This project has been in front of the Resource Commission now. I believe originally it was kind of introduced back in August. And then we've been to you last month in February and March as well. And tonight we're looking for hopefully final approval, as we think we've addressed the concerns we heard last time and behind the scenes have been working with city staff to get to the end game here. So with that, I'll let Kate take it away.
All right, so I'm gonna start off just back going over an overview of that initial existing watersheds again. This is the existing site, and it's kind of split between three larger watersheds, which are the east across Pheasant Branch Road, the south of the wetland, and the west along High Road right of way. And then there are three culverts under the Pheasant Branch Road on the east side that convey that northeast watershed across the road. And the western and southeast watershed converge to the south of property and are conveyed to the east under the Pheasant Branch Road right of way. And the video here is kind of showing the existing flow path from the High Road ditch to the Pheasant Branch Road. This ditch is along the High Road right of way. It conveys water to an intermittent stream to the south side of the site. So hopefully you guys can kind of see this video, and it's showing here that deeper flow path where that intermittent stream is. So it already has a higher flow volume. And then ultimately all three watersheds converge to the southeast side of the site on Pheasant Branch Road to an unnamed tributary of the Pheasant Branch. So the proposed design continues to use all these existing discharge locations. So nothing from the original stormwater had changed too much until the addendum. So the addendum has 3 main points that impacted the design. And they were based on comments from the city. So the first change was that a section of about 4 acres was removed from the offsite watershed H4. So that's that northeast or northwest watershed, that large offsite area. That was slightly reduced. And then the watershed was also split between developed and undeveloped areas. So the sub watersheds H4.1 and H4.2 are the undeveloped areas. So that's the area to the north and the northwest corner. And then sub watershed H4.3 is the developed area, and that includes the High Road and Shamrock subdivision. Then the runoff volume from the undeveloped areas was decreased to match the infiltration modeling, so that it was matched the Middleton pre-development curve numbers. And then the fourth change was just that there were some edits to the curve numbers for the offsite agricultural areas, so that it matched the cropland a bit better for the runoff rate control. So the major impact of these changes was that there was just less runoff volume from the offsite area in the infiltration modeling. And this volume reduction decreased the amount of stay on the site was providing from the offsite area and just the overall stay on. So to improve that, the infiltration basin in the southwest corner was increased. So that was the major change. And then there were some changes to the wet pond in that area as well, just to offset that increase the infiltration basin. So with those changes, I'm going to go over the overall site results. For total suspended solids, the goal or peak discharge, the goal is to have the 1, 2, 5, 10, 25, 100, and 200 year meeting that pre-development rate. And for the combined site, that is true. There's some small increases for the northeast watershed for the smaller events, but that's just due to limitations of the grading and the contours of the existing site and proposed stormwater facilities. But the overall combined site is meeting those rates. For total suspended solids, the goal was to get 80% removal of the total suspended solids created by the new developments, which is being met within the wet ponds, the bioretention basins, and the infiltration basins. And then the last goal was to provide the 100% stay-on rate, which is being provided within the bioretention basins, the infiltration basins, and then passively across the whole site. So that graphic kind of shows the stay-on provided in each watershed, and that includes that passive stay-on within the grass areas. Another goal was to provide the stay-on kind of spread out across the site instead of having the majority of it regionally. And only 17.7% of the overall stay-on is provided within those regional infiltration facilities. So that is still spread out across the site. So that wraps up the major design criteria. And if there's any other questions or anything like that, thank you for your time.
Okay, this is Warren.
Yep.
Is the culverts on Pheasant Branch Road adequate to handle the 100-year flood?
For the 100-year, they're meeting the peak discharge, but for the smaller events, that's something in those future phases that'll have to be considered to make sure that they're not going to flood the street more than they are in the existing.
And
That's, yeah.
Warren, we have had kind of separate discussions with the consultant about how to route this water down the existing ditch lines on both High and Pheasant Branch. You know, and then what might that look like in the future when High Road is eventually improved to an urban cross section?
Mm-hmm.
So that's being talked about, but I don't, you know, we're not, they're not really at that level of detail yet, or I shouldn't say that. I haven't seen that level of detail yet.
So that would be part of the discussion of this project, or is that a separate item?
So for each phase by phase, so there's about 5 phases for this report, in each, so this is the overall plan, and then when we go through each phase for development, they'll each have their own separate reports. So there might be more details for each of those sections addressed within each phase's development.
I guess I was replying to Eric, is that discussion as part of this project then, Eric, about the channel downstream and the culverts? Or is that a
About the
separate- is that a
western
sep-
crib into the conservancy.
Right,
Yes, I mean, I think what you're asking maybe, Warren, you know, the proposed and the existing watersheds, they haven't made any big diversions in any different direction. You know, conveyance, all of the conveyances, all of the piping and inlet capacities and overtopping routes and that kind of stuff is required to be analyzed as part of the stormwater plan. Yeah, but what you guys are looking at tonight is more of a comprehensive plan, you know. So they're just not at that level of detail yet that I've reviewed the conveyances.
but as I'm asking, then it will be reviewed by you.
Yes.
Okay. And the volume of runoff, not just the peaks, is going to increase because of the development. And so you'll be getting more water on a routine basis down that channel.
Only for storms above 2.5 inches or above the average annual rainfall. You know,
Well,
the other weird thing, and I don't want to get too far into the details, you know, since the city requires a pre-settlement curve number, there will be, you know, that's not what's happening now with the ag fields. I suppose depending on the time of season. You know, you could say that in August when the corn is high, those lands might not be discharging that much water, but at other times of the year, they'll be discharging more water than in a meadow condition.
right.
So there are a few kind of built-in conservative assumptions in Middleton's ordinance that will help reduce those volumes of flow also. But yes, you're correct. The infiltration calculation is just based on average annual rainfall.
Right, but you'll get 100% infiltration is good, but during the winter when you have frozen ground, you won't have infiltration, so you will be getting more runoff.
Yeah, I don't know if you could say in a frozen situation, I mean, wouldn't everything run off in the winter? Pavement or frozen
Well,
ground?
if you've enhanced the runoff by having a lot of pavement there versus having fields which would trap some of the water. So I'm just saying you're going to get more volume of runoff, not peaks. And is the channel going to be adequate to handle that increased volume on a routine basis?
Understood. And I did,
Yeah.
Kate and Wade, there are a lot of concerns about the intermittent stream running along the south edge, and that it's currently head cutting. The assumed reason for that is increased volume of discharge.
Yeah, with the loss of ET takes a lot of water and we're not going to have much ET on this site. So that volume will have to go somewhere too, maybe to go infiltration, but not all the time. So I guess, I don't know, I guess that's something you're going to be looking at then, Eric, in the future.
I will be looking at that, Warren, but we don't have an ordinance requirement to reduce the volume of discharge from the larger storms.
I think the ordinance says the developer has responsibility for downstream discharges, not necessarily reducing them, but there is a point in there. It says they have responsibility.
For non-erosive flow, I think is what it says, yeah, or something to
Yeah.
that effect.
Right.
I'll just
So-
add that I think it's important to keep in mind too, from a couple of meetings back when we talked about routing that offsite flows through our system. You know, part of the rationale behind that is what we're talking about here. I think the developer accepted the more routine maintenance that will inevitably require of them in these regional facilities, but I do think that goes a long way, you know, to put a good foot forward to make sure we're cognizant of that downstream safe conveyance.
And I'm looking at a Dane County parcel map right now on my other screen. Those rectangular properties that encompass that, what we call the western tributary, or that southern channel itself, those are still in private lands, Eric, as far as
That's
I know?
correct, yep.
Okay. All right.
Along
My
with the property that's in the, the southwestern notch of this plat and the farmstead and hill
Yeah,
across the street in between High and Grayburg.
yeah. One of my question would be, even though the overall site peak flows on the peak flow chart, are all being met, and this is going to be developed in phases, the phases that do discharge through the storm culverts under Pheasant Branch Road to the north, those will be later phases, I take it. Is that
Yes.
is that true?
Yep.
And I don't know if the individual discharges from those watersheds are also being met, or are they being, I know there's a couple of exceptions on smaller storms. But do you have, I just want to, are the culverts that are there now on the north side, north along Pheasant Branch Road, any more likely to overtop or be an issue under future conditions?
So can you guys see
Just
this?
from a peak,
thing?
just from a peak flow, yeah.
Yeah. So the next phase is going to be this bigger basin in the north, kind of west top corner.
Mm.
So the plan is then that phase 3 would then attach to that basin. So everything should be being built after the bigger stormwater basins are being built. So that way the culverts that are to the east along the Pheasant Branch Road are going to be performing as we have it in the overall stormwater report of, there are a few conditions where there are higher flows for the 1 and 2 year, but the rest are being met.
So does phase 3 actually flow to the west and then south to the channel?
Yeah, so phase 3 kind of splits along that road, which is in red.
Okay.
Everything to the west of that road is going to flow into that big basin in the west corner. And then the basins along Pheasant Branch Road are collecting those kind of blue, purpley properties to the right.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Well, to me, a key that I appreciate in the notes that Eric included in the recommendations here, that we know this is going to happen in phases, and we know things can change from phase to phase. And I think, Eric, you've made a clear point that you'll have detailed stormwater management plans as the phases go on to make sure things are still being managed according to the overall plan and meeting those goals. So if that's in writings in some fashion, that certainly is a good thing to keep, and I appreciate that. We're talking about, do you have any, I mean, it all depends on market conditions, but this could go on for 5-10 years, right?
Yeah, I think the 5 to 10 years is kind of the hope right now, based on my conversations with the developer.
Okay.
Are there any more questions on?
I have two. On page 6 of 870, comment number 4, the 90% stay on for high density residential areas. I was just wondering if Eric, how do you feel about the answer? Your question was that the reason or wisdom for allowing the high density residential to come in at 90%, especially when it is sitting on better soils than the adjacent land, where the infiltration basins are planned, is not clear. And I'm wondering, are you satisfied with the answer?
Yeah, I'm satisfied. If you look on the page that Kate's showing, I made that comment, and partially for that and partially for this off-site credit we're allowing, they expanded the infiltrative capacity in those in J3 and maybe in H6, but that system is now infiltrating better. That's where the high density residential is going to drain. So yes, that satisfied my comment.
Okay, and then on page 11 of the document, it shows the cross section for the different basins. And I was just wondering what kind of grass is going to be in that. I can see the native plant plugs are listed, but what kind of grass is going to go in there? And my interest is making sure that we can reduce mowing as much as possible so as not to contribute more to climate change and try to get Middleton closer to our 100% renewable energy goals by reducing the need to mow.
Lisa, what page is that on again?
Bring it up.
It's page 15 of the packet, I believe, but
All
it's
right.
page 11 of whatever the 800.
I got you.
Page-
I'm there.
That's the one.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Kate and Wade, that's for you guys. What's the maintenance plan for the basin floors?
I don't know that we have that level of detail right now. I do know that behind the scenes, we've been working with the high density residential developer and the overall developer here on a homeowners association for the maintenance of that, because we do know and we have advised that it's going to be a big undertaking, right? So it's not the idea is to make it the responsibility of the whole development. So there's more resources to pull from. But I think we, can take your comments and jest and make sure we incorporate that into the final write-up for this phase, especially for those large basins.
Thank you.
Eric, I just want to clarify one thing. You talked about just going in phases. This is a major development and over 5 to the next 10 years. And we've been talking about revising the 1981 discharge for infiltration. If we do revise that, would additional phases be required to follow the new change in the ordinance?
That's a good question, Warren. Off the cuff, I would say no. They would be required to meet what we're asking them to meet tonight.
I would agree with you, Eric. I think it'd be a little unfair to not know what might change in the future and to expect a plan of development to meet some unknown targets that who knows what it's going to be. As much as I'd like to, Warren, I'm all in favor of that, but I'm not sure I could support that.
I
Well,
think
between this and Bell Farms, these are the major developments that are going to occur in Middleton. And so
Yep.
Okay, I just want clarification. I kind of assumed that would be the case, but I think it's too bad.
Yeah, I agree.
I think if they came back and wanted some changes, then we can impose whatever new ordinance we had on the changes to the development, but only if there were changes from what was planned.
Yeah, that over the period of years, this has been a hang up with Fox Ridge, when they came in, they were grandfathered, and Stonefield was grandfathered. And so we essentially have no runoff control ordinance features at all in either one of those developments. And it's just, we never seem to catch up.
Just to make sure I understood, I think it was David's comment about the, so if the developer sticks with the plan that gets approved and doesn't have to make any changes to the plan in the future for the additional phases, then the developer can stick with whatever we approve tonight, but any changes would trigger an additional review. And at that time, we might be able to say, now we want you to strive to meet the new stormwater standard.
Yeah, that's what I believe to be true, but I am by no means an attorney. But of course, the problem you run into is that if you're talking about the final couple phases, what can be done to make it meet new criteria might be limited, depending on what the new criteria are and what's going on with those last phases. So yeah, it's not easy to do this thing on the 100% scale, but to then take a subset of it and try to make it work with new ordinances might be very, very tough. I don't think I need to tell that to Wade.
Kate, could you bring up the phase, the map showing the phases again, please? Okay. All right, thanks.
Well, let me ask now that I look at, so I got a question. So the phase 4, which presumably means the last phase has some of the substantial stormwater features, the more regional ones. Are those? And are they not?
So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 is that right-hand corner, phase 4 is the south, and then phase 5 is kind of this middle east piece.
But are those features in phase 4 area, the larger stormwater features, are they serving areas outside of phase 4? I think they are, aren't they?
They're serving this small basin area, this like one rooftop area. And this fire retention basin in the future will also go this way. But those are the only 2 areas that will eventually get to the south. This phase 5 comes after that.
Oh, I see.
So in the phase 1
5,
report,
okay.
which we haven't finished yet, but we're working on, we include this little area that is going to drain to the southeast. And right now there will be no treatments for that. And we're including that in a report to show that the phase 1 is still going to be meeting the standards for just the phase 1 alone. And that's the goal for the future phases as well, to make sure that each phase approach is going to meet those standards.
All right.
So Eric, what are we looking for tonight? A motion for approval?
How about a motion to accept staff's recommendation? Might be the easiest way to, so I've asked for approval of this as a comprehensive, an overall plan. And then I put 3 conditions on it, which are not unusual conditions, just more kind of structural conditions of how things need to get through the approval process.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And so the motion is to approve the comprehensive stormwater management plan subject to the 3 conditions in the memo?
Yes.
Okay.
That was my intent.
Is there any
And-
further discussion?
Well, yeah, just to be you know, obviously the Dane County has to do their calculations and verify all these numbers. I don't know if they've started that yet or have yet to start it, but that's obviously a key issue there. And are there other DNR permits that are yet to be secured besides erosion control and that kind of stuff? Is there any other wetland or Chapter 30 permits yet to be issued?
So we just have to do the typical wrap NOI, Jim. There, the wetland has been delineated and there are no wetland waterway permits per se with this.
Okay.
They do need to get through DSPS approval also, Jim, which
Yeah.
may cause difficulties.
Who's DSPS again?
Safety and Professional Services.
Plumbing
Oh,
code, Warren. They basically
Plumbing
have
code.
Yeah. Because these filters have pipes to them, right?
okay. So any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So the motion is carried unanimously.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
The only
you.
good news is that usually sometimes I print out the whole agenda and I didn't do that tonight. And pack it. If I
would've
printed
run
out
out of
900
paper.
pages, that would have put a crimp in my printer.
That's right. Thank you, Wade and Kate. Appreciate all your
Thank you.
efforts here.
Okay, the next item of business then is an update by Eric on the Pheasant Branch corridor restoration.
Yeah. All right. So you guys asked for this last month.
You're gonna get it now, right?
I don't-
Yeah.
That sounds, you got an hour and a half discussion, Eric, or?
No, not at all. You know, and so this all started before I came to the city. But as far as the creek corridor proper, we had a project on the South Fork, and that there was some grant funding available for that. That got finished in 2021. They just kind of finished their warranty period with the vegetation, and that's looking pretty good. The Donna Drive ponds, which are behind the police station on Donna Drive, those experienced, catastrophic failure. Those were rebuilt in 2019. And I don't know if you remember, or maybe that was Swab. I brought that before. There is an issue with the reconstruction that needs to be corrected, and I am still working on that part of it. You know, that's right up in here.
Mhm.
There was a big blowout downstream of Park Street. And so there was a project to redo the apron. There's two 14-foot diameter culverts underneath Park Street. So that project was done and the stream banks in that immediate area were stabilized. That was finished in 2020. And then what we're left with now is the main corridor between Deming all the way down to Century and beyond. And that was split into several projects. We had one consultant do this main stem upstream of Century just for the stream bank restoration part of it. And that was finished just before the end of the year. There was a second project by a different contractor that's just downstream of Century, and that was almost finished at the end of 2022. And they're really still just working to correct punch list items and things like that. Then there's a third project in this main corridor, which is pretty much strictly to redo the trail system and the bridges. So over the winter, they poured new abutments for each of the bridges, and the bridges have all been reset.
No?
There was a hiccup with the bridges themselves. I think they had to correct the bridge railing or retrofit some more rail in there to make it better for fall protection, meet requirements between the spindles, balusters of the railing. And so they're going to begin, with work on the trail itself, and the current schedule has them paving and finishing up towards the end of July. And that's the summary.
How many new bridges, were we able to use all the existing bridges, or do we have to do new ones in several places?
No, I think they were all just reused.
Okay, good. I thought there was some question about that. Yeah. So it's good that we were able to use the existing ones and not have to pay the cost of all new ones. So how about funding from FEMA? Or reimbursement?
Don Knorr brought that up before the SWUB meeting. Yeah, we have not yet submitted to FEMA. We have submitted for grant reimbursement from DNR. So that should be coming in a month or so, 2 months, let's say. I know there are other projects, flood mitigation or flood repair projects that have been through FEMA, but are now hung up with Wisconsin Emergency Management. So yeah, I would estimate it's going to be quite a while before we see those FEMA funds.
Well, I think we've kind of benefit this restoration because we haven't had large flood peaks in the past 2 years. So that's been kind of a good deal. We haven't experienced any more of those 2018 and 2019 floods. So that probably helped a little bit.
No, I don't know if, Herb Garn is still on the call. He's been sending me spot photos where he's identifying issues, and I'm keeping a list for the next project, essentially.
So Eric, any of the vegetative tree removal or revegetation, is that yet to be done, or is there still that phase or effort to be done? Do you know?
Well, that's the vegetative restoration was done for the stream bank portions
Right.
late in the year. So you're not going to see, you're not going to see a strong stand of grass or anything until June.
Right.
And that's still under warranty. But then no, for the trails and bridges, the restoration work won't be done until June, July, I would guess.
And I see, last time I was by like Park Street, that still says trail closed. Is that still the case?
Yeah.
Trails are closed. Okay.
Yeah, it won't be open. I mean, they need to build new bridge approaches,
Yeah.
basically, Jim. So there's no connectivity.
Yeah.
Even though the path is still intact in a lot of places or most places.
People are walking back there, right? I assume. I mean,
People walk right through no matter what we do.
yeah.
If the staff or someone on Parks has selected photos, maybe it'd be nice to share them with our committee if sometime.
Sure, I could send you a set of photos.
Well, I mean, that's a lot, but if selected ones here and there, just give us an idea of what it looks like in certain areas.
Yeah, or I could send a link, so it's not
Yeah.
blocking down everyone's emails.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, appreciate that. Well, that was a major effort, and certainly the Mayor Gertup was very much involved in trying to help shepherd this through. So that's got to be an accomplishment for him. Okay, thanks. Is there any more questions on that? If not, we'll go through the water year summary of data collected in Pheasant Branch for year 2022. As you know, I've been doing this every year, and I think we have a lot of funds tied up in data collection, so I think it's good to summarize it and present it. This one's kind of a routine year, so it's probably not too exciting. My wife always makes fun of the meteorologists on Channel 27 and gets all excited about large flood events or temperatures, and hydrologists are kind of the same thing. They get more excited about big floods than they do routine data, but routine data sometimes is good, or routine flow. So this is a summary of 2022. Next slide then. This is the graph, shows the accumulation of precipitation collected at the gauging station at USGS at Parmenter Street for the water year. And the water year for USGS is from October 1 of 2021 through September 30th of 2022. So as you can see, by the end of the year, we had about 38 inches, which is now normal. This 30-year average is 37. Oh, this is about 36, maybe 37 inches is normal now for the average precipitation. Back 20, 30 years ago, it was 32 inches. So now, because of probably climate change, we have increased precipitation. So that's a sizable increase from 32 up to 37. Next slide. This slide shows the recorded discharge at the Pheasant Branch at Parmenter Street, and the discharge is in cubic feet per second. And you can see we had a number of events during the year, but none of them were very large. The largest one probably occurred in about September there, about 185 CFS. The 2-year flood peak is 285 to 300, so we're quite a bit below the 2-year flood. Next slide. This is a slide shows the annual peak discharge since we started the gauging station in 1975 up through 2022. And the bottom is a trend line that shows the increasing trend in flood peaks. Back in first time we did a frequency analysis, or USGS, the 100-year flood was calculated to be 800 CFS. And then we did our flood insurance study. It was done by a consultant in 2002, 2004, and they used 1,200 CFS for the 100-year flood. And then another report done that Herb Garn and I did back in 2008, the 100-year flood was calculated to 1,500 CFS. And in 2020, after that large floods, USGS calculated the 100-year flood to be 2,100 CFS. So 100-year flood has been a moving target over these past 30, 40 years, which points out the value of long-term data collection, because usually a hydrologist is pretty comfortable if you got 25 years of data to make a fair estimate of the 100-year flood. And this year we would have been, this case, we would have been way off.
Warren, if you'd stopped doing those calculations, a 100-year flood would be lower, right?
Pardon?
If you stopped doing those calculations, we'd have a smaller 100-year flood, wouldn't we?
Well, that might happen pretty soon, Jim. At least we won't have any increase. So next slide. Oh, this is a stream flow volume. And you can see that actually the volumes look like they're increasing more than the flood peaks are, which is what you'd expect because of increased impervious area on the South Fork, and then in the Greenway Center and around the Costco area, that we have increased impervious area, which increases the runoff. And also, as I pointed out before, we lost ET, which is a big factor in these areas. And so the volume of runoff has increased greatly over those years. Next slide. And just interrupt me at any time you want to if you have any questions about these slides. This is again the daily stream flow for the North Fork, which is the gauge at Airport Road, and then the South Fork at Pheasant Branch. And you could see the North Fork is much flashier. That shows peak discharges at rain events, where on the South Fork, because of South Pond, they're damper. The flood peaks are damper. And so we don't have the flashiness that occurs. Next one, please. This is the annual sediment load that's collected at the Pheasant Branch at Parmenter Street and we didn't start collecting sediment until 1978. And as you can see, we have a significant trend line is decreasing. And if you could look at 2002, that's when the confluence pond was put in place. You could see that from there on, the sediment load has decreased even more than before that, except for, of course, for 2018 and 19. Next slide. This one shows the sediment load as compared to stream flow volume. And generally speaking, as volume of runoff increases, sediment load increases because discharge carries more sediment. But in our case, we have volume of flow increasing, sediment discharge decreasing. It shows that our stormwater management practices are effective. Next one. This is phosphorus data collected at our Pheasant Branch at Parmenter Street, and we didn't start collecting phosphorus data in 1993. So the trend doesn't look as quite as significant, but it does show that we have that same decreasing trend, especially starting in 2002. And you can see 2021 and 2022 were quite a bit lower. And we had those three large years of 18, 19, and 20. Next slide. This is a similar slide as the one in sediment that shows that we have flow volume increasing and phosphorus loads decreasing. Next slide. This is another way of looking at the trends. So the diamonds are the annual flow volume, and the bottom one squares are concentrations of phosphorus. And I said before, generally speaking, as flow increases, you would expect to see phosphorus increasing. Now there is some dilution taking place as you get more water in the same phosphorus load. You would expect to have maybe a lower concentration. But if you look at the 2020, 21, 22, what the flows are there, and then go back to 2000, you could see for similar type flows, the concentrations were about 3 or 4 times higher. So it looks like we are making progress in decreasing the amount of phosphorus going into the Pheasant Branch Conservancy in and into Lake Mendota. Next slide. These slides again are for the North Fork and the South Fork, showing the volume of runoff. And you could see that in some cases, the volume of runoff, like in 2018 on the South Fork, is very similar to the North Fork, even though the discharge drainage area is about 50% lower on the South Fork. But in both cases, again, the volume of runoff or flow is increasing. Next slide. This is the sediment load for those gauging stations, the North Fork and South Fork. And you can see the large sediment loads that we have on the North Fork. In 2022, it's not very large at all, especially compared to 18, 19, and 20. And it's even smaller on the South Fork, where, as you would expect, not to have as much sediment because of urbanization that's taken place. The next slide then shows the same thing with phosphorus. The North Fork phosphorus load for 2022 is lower than preceding years, especially compared to 18, 19, and 20. And then the South Fork doesn't have as much phosphorus. Yeah, this one here is a little deceiving because the labels, if you look at the South Fork, that's like the peak is like 7,000 pounds year. And then if you look at 2019, it's 20,000. So it's a scale factor. I didn't figure out how to adjust access on this one. Okay, next one. And this just shows you the breakdown for 2022 from the North Fork and the South Fork. This is the load going into the confluence pond. So the sediment load on the North Fork was 60% of 67% of the at the gauging station, or 256,000 tons. And then we have an intermittent area between the Airport Road and the confluence pond, where we got estimated at 38 tons. And then the South Fork at the gauging station was 66 tons, or 17%. And then we estimated another 24 tons going in between Deming Way and the confluence pond. And the same thing with phosphorus load, that 72% of the phosphorus came from the North Fork, and then over 4,153 pounds. And then we have that intermittent flow of about 8%. And then in the South Fork combined of the two is about 20%. Next slide. And this is just another way of comparing the phosphorus loads on the South Fork and the North Fork. You could see the North Fork has much higher phosphorus loads. And of course, that's due to the manure spreading. We had hoped to see, and maybe I should have mentioned before, the decrease in phosphorus load because of the digesters that have been put in place. I guess I was surprised when that last month's presentation that they've been in place longer than I thought. So it's not apparent looking back at our phosphorus loads that we're seeing a decrease so far. Hopefully, as more farms contribute to the digester, we should see some decrease in the phosphorus, because most of this is from spreading manure.
Yeah, Warren, I'm going to repeat myself, and I apologize for my little soapbox here, but again, there's probably more cows in the watershed now than there were 10, 20 years ago. And like we said last month, the only way phosphorus is actually removed from the watershed is the stuff that's trucked out of the watershed. You know, so again, it's just the phosphorus reduction from those digesters is because the product is being shipped out of the watershed.
Right.
And so that's not a bad thing. It's just, it's not eliminating the phosphorus generation, you know?
Yeah, well, if it's used wisely, the phosphorus some other place for growing plants, I guess in the end result, it would be removed.
I hope. Well,
Your hope.
I hope that's the case.
Yeah. I didn't mention before, and actually the 2022, the little bit higher phosphorus loads, because most of the phosphorus came off in a March event. So it depends a lot when it occurs. If we have a rain or a heavy snow melt during the winter period, you get a higher phosphorus load, versus 2021, they had just as much flow and same flood peaks, but they didn't have that winter event. And that makes a big difference.
I think you also might get some benefit, Jim, because there's less pressure to spread manure during the winter. If you're, discharging to the digester, it's reducing your volume and you get more storage space.
Oh, I guess, I assumed if they were signed up with a digester, they would have all the manure go to the digester. That's not true, huh?
Well, I think some of it gets returned as
liquid.
As a spreadable nutrient.
Yeah.
Oh, so then they take the liquid back and spread it over the, anyway,
I believe so.
yeah. Oh. Okay. Next slide. And this one here is just a summary of the phosphorus and sediment loads that are trapped in the confluence pond. And you can see in 2022, the phosphorus inflow was 5,800 pounds. And the outflow was 3,140. And so we trapped 2,660 pounds, or 46% of the phosphorus was trapped. For sediment, we had an inflow of 385 tons. And the outflow was 98. So we trapped 287, or 75%. The reason of course, we trap more sediment is a lot of the phosphorus dissolved in the confluence pond is not effective at all in trapping dissolved phosphorus. And so that's why there's a differential. And you could see there's a large variation of over the years. We trapped on phosphorus, we trapped as low as 10% and as high as 46, or last year was high, one of the highest ones we had at 46%. In phosphorus, sediment, we trapped up to 89% one time and down to 35%. So on the average, we're trapping about 28% of the phosphorus and 64% of the sediment. I think that's in line with the credits that we're getting for this feature, right, Eric? And I think Eric Thompson and you made an estimate of how much.
We're getting credited 77.5% TSS. I don't remember the phosphorus number off the top of my head.
So how does TSS compare to these numbers?
Well, that compares to your 64%
Okay,
for sediment.
yeah. Total suspended solids.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so we're getting credit for more than we're doing.
Yes.
Good.
Are these lowest years, like 2013? Is that a low flow year?
I can't remember. No, 2013 with amount of phosphorus, I wouldn't guess so at all, no. 2012 would be, you can almost look at the amount of sediment going in or phosphorus to figure which years are low or high. Like 2019, we had 25,000 pounds because of all the flow we had. So I don't know why 2013. The earlier ones were calculated by Herb, and then he sent me the spreadsheet, and I think I took over in 2014, but it's kind of convoluted. And so I really should go back sometime and look at some of those early years to make sure we're consistent with how we're looking at this. And I don't know if maybe Todd Stunbeck was involved in those early 2 or 3 years too. That 10.9% looks strange to me, but we've had other years that are low too. So any more questions on that at this table? If not, next one. Oh, this is just a real quick summary of showing the North Fork has a drainage area of 9.7 square miles and annual flow of 967. Had a peak discharge of 212 CFS. Sediment load was 256, when the phosphorus was 4,150. Where the South Fork at 6.9 square miles, or about 50% smaller than the North Fork, had an annual flow of 664 CFS days. A peak discharge of 159, a sediment load of 66, and an annual phosphorus load of 851. And Pheasant Branch at Parmenter with 18.4 square miles had annual flow of about 2,570 CFS days, and a peak discharge of 184, and the annual sediment load of 128, and a phosphorus load of 3,530. And I didn't mention that again, but Confluence Pond not only traps phosphorus and sediment, but also reduces the peak discharge of about 20%. And you could kind of see that we had a 212 and 159 ended up combined with 184. So it is effective, especially at lower flood peaks, of reducing the discharge, which is good for the downstream channel for preventing erosion. So next slide. So in summary, water year 2022 was close to an average year for annual precipitation of 35 inches. No large flood peaks during the year, largest less than the 2-year flood. Lower flood peaks result in lower sediment and phosphorus loads. While flood peaks were lower, runoff volume didn't increase as much as flood peaks. The phosphorus load from the North Fork was 4,150 pounds compared to 851 pounds for the South Fork. The largest phosphorus load occurred in March, probably a result of manure runoff. And the Confluence Pond trapped 75% of the sediment and 46% of the phosphorus. And I think that's the end. Is there any questions? If not,
Thank
we'll
you.
go on, we'll go on
Thanks,
to the next
Warren.
topic. Okay. We'll go on to the next topic then, which is discussion on whether we should have in-person or virtual meetings. We had this.
So
Go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, council passed an ordinance in March, which basically allows each committee to decide for themselves how to move forward. And it's not exactly written to say that, but virtual, is can be the same as a hybrid meeting. We can meet in person and allow members or guests, consultants to come virtually. It's up to you guys. The only requirement is that you have to be present with a camera on if you want to, if the commission wants to allow that to count as a voting member for quorum purposes.
We discussed this. Let's go ahead, Jim.
Well, I'll just mention that the Stormwater Utility Board met just before this meeting, Water Resources, and Warren and Ken Potter and who's the fourth person who was on both?
David.
Oh, there you are. All right. We voted to do the hybrid version where we would meet in person with a preference to meet in the conference chamber if available. But the options will be there for members to tune in virtually to an in-person meeting if that's more convenient. So just so you know what the previous group decided.
Is there any more discussion from Julie? Is this are you going to be on a member or is this your last meeting?
I believe this is my last meeting, unless I'm supposed to be here in May.
You have one more
Okay,
and maybe two.
okay.
Maybe forever, And Lisa's gone.
Yeah, this is my last meeting because the alder terms start in May.
Okay.
And my preference, if I'm going to be doing meetings, is to be able to have the option not to have an in-person setting.
So you'd be in favor of the hybrid also?
Yes.
So would I be allowed to make a motion that we basically copy the motion from before?
Yep, that sounds like a good idea.
All right, I'm making that motion then.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion for having our meetings at a hybrid in the future.
And,
Um,
and the other part of that, Warren, for those who weren't in the prior meeting, was a preference to use council chambers when available, as opposed to conference room B.
Yeah, I expressed concern about that small conference room, and so I think that I'd be more comfortable in the larger chamber. If there's no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
I,
Opposed? So the motion is carried. So the next item of business is then for discussion items for our next meeting. And I think, Eric, you said that you weren't prepared tonight for discussion, further discussion on that salt usage in Middleton. And so is that a possibility for May?
That's what I'm aiming for, yeah. We'll talk about that next month again.
That's May 17th, is that right?
Yes,
Thank you.
So you won't be there then, Lisa. You had some,
Well, I
So-
won't be here, but Randall Crowe from District 8, he will be on. And I can always tune in. If I see that the road salt and de-icing policy is going to be on the agenda, I would tune in. I would also hope that this body keeps on the list of things to do, not necessarily in May, but we had talked previously about reviewing the stormwater fees in lieu. And I think that's something that's still worth doing. Eric, if I remember correctly, isn't the county doing something similar and you wanted to wait for them to finish their work?
that was both my understanding and yes, my suggestion that we could just piggyback on if they come up with a new fee structure, that would be easier for us to ride on their coattails, copy them.
Sounds good.
in the future, we've talked about revising the stormwater ordinance. Eric, I know that's a big deal, but you already started on it, and I've made some recommendations for possible volume control. And I sent it to Ken for looking at some input from groundwater flooding. So I don't know when we want to take that up. You probably, when your agendas clears up.
Do you
Well-
anticipate anything from Bell Farms coming in, Eric?
The only thing that I'm aware of that you guys wanted to see from Bell Farm was how they were gonna handle private lot scale stormwater features. And we met with the developers team maybe on Monday, and they did send over the covenants, which do not include that information. So
No.
maybe that comes, I've got it on my list,
Okay,
but it may not.
Well, I guess I was expressing concern. I thought Jim and Herb had too about the increased volume of flows going into the pond and how Graber's Pond is going to be able to handle those and look at some kind of routing numbers and how much, what percentage of the time we're going to have discharge going downstream and what effect
Yeah,
that might
but-
have.
I don't think anybody can recover that model from 2010 from the EOR study. And I guess similar to Red Tail Ridge, we don't have anything in the ordinance to require that analysis. So that,
Consultant said he was going to do it. At our last meeting, he said he was going to look into it, right? He said they got the,
I don't know.
he said they got the modeler from EOR is now working for them and who developed the model.
Well, I just met with another consultant who was just making a marketing call. And that was Amber Leffers. And she said that she was involved in that study back in 2010. So maybe I'll ask her.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if we'll ever be able to answer that question. And I know some of the prior studies did take into account or try to at the time, you know, what are the impacts of future development on Graber? And I think that's why the commission, you know, has moved forward with the Tribeca diversion. You know, at some point Springs was discharging their cooling water into Graber Pond, and you stopped that.
Yeah, I think that study by EOR back in, I can't remember, 2010, depending on what the seepage rate showed anywhere from, we'd have discharges anywhere from 10 to 60% of the time out of Graber's Pond, assuming like a 904 or 905 elevation. So, you know, your outflow structure you design can handle that, but I think we should have an idea that we don't have very much discharge now going out of Graber Pond, right? But we well may have a lot more in the future, and to be aware of it. And what does that mean to the downstream channel?
Right. And I have had a meeting with MSA about the Graber outlet now, and yeah, they came up with some very sizable culverts beneath Misty Valley Drive in their first round here.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to, does Bell Farms have any responsibility for downstream flows that they produce? So, well, I guess we'll wait and see what they come up with at the next meeting, whenever that might be.
Well, maybe I should more directly ask that question of the consultant, Warren, and see what they're willing to do. I'm just not sure we can require them to prepare that analysis.
Yeah, if they can run the model and include evapotranspiration, which they didn't include in the earlier model. They used the same model that USGS did on the North Fork that included evapotranspiration, but they, for some reason, didn't include it, which is a major factor. On the other hand, is if the seepage rates, the more water moves towards the Conservancy, which it looks like it might, maybe the volume of flow is not going to increase all that much, except during the winter period when we don't get infiltration. So there's a lot of unknowns, I guess, going on, or some unknowns.
I think there are a lot of unknowns.
Yeah. Okay, is there any other topics that we want to talk about? And you're not running out of ideas or things to do, are you, Eric?
No, there's 6 items on next month's agenda already.
Yeah. Where do we stand on the floodplain work?
Steve and Nick have been working on that. We met with the DNR model reviewers again. We met with Madison. And we're going to meet with Dane County later this, I think that's tomorrow. We're meeting with Dane County to talk about the ramifications of modeling in the town of Springfield. That's moving forward.
Okay, good.
That's not one of the 6 items, so maybe that comes in June.
Okay. Okay, if nothing else, meeting's adjourned.
Good night.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Good night.
everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.